So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. This actually was going to be a slot that was going to be occupied by a channel update video, but I've decided to delay that by a few days because of a few things. But yeah, it will be something that will come sort of within the next 4 to 5 days, I would imagine, after this video releases. Some sort of channel update video, I think. But we'll see, because again, there's a few things that are sort of in play at the moment, which may very well change the content of that. But again, that's the sort of thing that can be saved for another time, because for now we are going to be dealing with this battle that we have before us, which is of course on the Winter Hamlet. And on this occasion actually the Winter Hamlet is very wintry, because of course there is the snow on the ground, and this is actually going to be a battle without a unified theme, so the factions are all over the place on both sides. So the blue team and the red team have got a mix of good, evil, orc, men, sort of all different kinds of factions. But unlike the last battle, which did have a kind of unifying theme in rebelling against Sauron, this one at the very least should be higher quality in terms of the play that is actually on display today, because all of the players involved are of good quality indeed. We'll start off with the blue team, considering it's the team where the player who sent it to me is going to be on today. Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, who interestingly enough has also sent me quite a few replays recently in the same set as this battle as well, so sort of again these larger field battles on these rather interesting maps that have been sent to me by both Eclipse and Sin. Eclipse this time did not send me this particular one, but there are going to be others that will come in the near future, I'm sure. He's going to be playing as Rohan, which is an interesting choice, of course. Generally speaking, you think of Rohan as the high-risk, high-reward faction in the game. You will either be, generally speaking, you'll either be very dominant in your win, or you'll be quite timid in your loss. That's generally how it works out as Rohan, especially if you play into their cavalry quite heavily. On a map like this, that could be an interesting move. There's plenty of wide open spaces to use cavalry, but equally there's also a lot of places where the enemy can try and mitigate that with narrower parts of the battlefield. Got some Eastmark Spearmen here on the front. They will be a little bit more useful in the upcoming hotfix, because it'll tweak them a little bit to make it so they're not the low tier spears that are subject to the prec trait anymore. Having said that, for their cost, I can hardly deny the fact that they do have their uses. I don't think they're as good as they first appear. You know, very, very cheap javelins combined with being kind of low, like militia tier spears. Sounds like a winning combination. I don't think they're all that good, but they are still a useful part of the Rohan army. Without that's something I can't deny. The Helmingast back here, which if you're going to go for a more infantry-focused Rohan army, which Eclipse may very well have done, I mean, he has got most of his army, I think, hidden away. But the Helmingast are a very useful part of that, because of the 2 foot archers Rohan have, they are most certainly the best. They're not quite up to the same level as stuff like the Bardian Marksman, but they're not too far behind, and they do offer you a pretty decent unit in all situations. They can defend themselves in melee, they're good in a skirmish fight, they deal capable missile damage as well with their bows. A nice unit to have, albeit you may not have the money to bring them if you dip into Rohan's more expensive units with regards to their cavalry. Rhudaur Axemen are over here, so the one thing that you can certainly rely on for Rohan in terms of their infantry, they may have a few rather obvious omissions, but the one thing they don't lack for is armour-piercing shock troops, whether it's the more basic version here in the Rhudaur Axemen, or the more expensive variant you see back here in the Westmark Marshals. Both of these 2 units are very, very useful to add a lot of AP into Rohan's line. Maybe not the most melee defense for the price point from either of these 2 units, but the damage against more heavily armoured factions is most certainly worth it as long as you can keep your line together. And you can do so with units like the Medicel Guard, very high quality unit, of course, javelins first, and then they're very, very capable line infantry units of the bodyguard tier in melee as well. Then there's a few hidden units, a Helmingast unit there that's hidden in the trees, some Rhudaur spears I think I just saw, more Rhudaur Axemen at the very least, more Westmark Marshals, Rhudaur Axemen, so maybe more of an aggressive infantry focus, and then there are some units in the trees over there as well, Riders of the Fold and Sons of Eorl. But we'll see most of his army reappear in just a moment. Another rather aggressive army, actually, with regards to their own focus, is going to be Sin's army today, which is going to be Harad. He's got some Southron archers, which again, Harad do lack a little bit when it comes to skirmishing with an enemy archer force. They can do it through sheer numbers, but certainly in comparison to older versions of the game, it's not quite so easy for them to do that anymore. They can still manage it, but it's not something you should hang your hat on if you're playing as Harad. You definitely want to be doing your damage, or at least being effective and efficient in other ways other than just trying to bury the enemy beneath an avalanche of low tier arrows. Southron archers are not a terrible arch unit, but again, They have wooden armour. It's better than the no armour that the Haradrim archers have, but even so, it's more limited in terms of the protection that it offers. That's Engsvitz's civilians over there. We'll get on to him in just a moment. Haradrim spearmen backing up some dismounted Serpent Guard who have the armour upgrades, as well as some Southron pikemen in there as well. So all-purpose units here. The cannon fodder, which is the Haradrim spearmen, the quality line infantry, which is the dismounted Serpent Guard with the upgrades, and then the armour-piercing phalanx offered by the Southron pikes. A pretty cost-effective front line, this, especially when it comes to their melee abilities. Most of these units, however, do lack a little bit at range in comparison to other units to equivalent units from Western Kingdoms of Men. Mahud Beast Hunters, of course, one thing Harad can certainly count on is having a very good javelin contingent, and the Beast Hunters are very central to that. Haradrim Spearmen, a lot of Haradrim Spearmen actually, so a very numbers-focused approach, which shouldn't be too surprising from Harad, to be honest with you. It's something which is very much in their wheelhouse. Another unit of Beast Hunters back here. His army's quite deep in how far it runs back in the map here. Trollmen of Harad, so all the Trollmen units here at the back, including the Champions of Neferat. Some more Trollmen there. Some Southron warbands, so some basic armor-piercing spears also. Be interesting to see how this army sort of approaches the situation, because they can't swarm forward with numbers in the interior of the settlement as easily. So they may choose to bide their time instead. There are some Hashari Shadows, some Serpent Guard, and some mounted Black Serpents as well, obviously. The multiple HP Lancers, very fast, Harad have. Very fast moving, very damaging contingent of cavalry this, but also quite vulnerable to being caught in melee, and the Shadows are no exception to that. But we also have Dol Amroth here, played by Engsvith. Civilians over here. He's also got some supporting units maybe going to help Harad in the form of some Black Swan Renegades. The rest of his army, however, is out here on the more open area of the map, which is where Dol Amroth will more traditionally be at home, not because of the civilians. Doran Ernal archers, again, they're okay in a skirmish fight. Better when you upgrade their armour, of course, but it's the sort of thing which Gondor are a little bit more competent at than Dol Amroth engaging in that sort of warfare. Dol Amroth can still do it, but it's not as big a priority for them as it is for their nearest allies. Archers, we've got some upgraded men, well, actually no, not some upgraded men-at-arms, some upgraded pikes, interestingly enough, with the men-at-arms as well, so a classic phalanx this of line infantry and pikemen. Some halberdiers just in behind as well. Be interesting to see how they hold up. We also have some Haven Guard, again, heavy swordsmen, bodyguard tier heavy swordsmen at that. Again, they're only one unit, but they are so strong that it does genuinely make a difference to Dol Amroth's infantry force. We also have some Belfast Marines, Perithil Champions, of course, another really fine heavy swordsman unit. It's the one area of Dol Amroth's infantry where they really do shine quite a lot. Fear causing as well, of course, but over here with another unit of Belfast Marines we can see some Swan Knights, some Haven Knights, and some Knights of the Silver Swan. So a really nice triumvirate of heavy Dol Amroth cavalry here. In comparison to the lighter, faster moving Haradrim cavalry, they could offset one another quite nicely if they decide to ride as a unit. But it'll be interesting to see what Dol Amroth decides to do with their cavalry here, because it's definitely the mainstay of their army here, because there's nothing too outstanding other than the heavy swordsman units. Like, this isn't an army that's going to blow an opposition army away, so we shall just have to wait and see. And then we have Tundra's Fox playing as my favourite faction, tongue-in-cheek of course, Erebor. Erebor Legionaries, Axe Guard of Erebor, Iron for Axe Throwers. To be fair, with Erebor right here, Dol Amroth have got all of the infantry support they could ever want, really. Ironfoot Warriors, combined with some Ironfoot Pikes, so another phalanx and a Dwarven phalanx as well, so heavy armour, heavy mass, going to be very difficult to smash through them from the front. Highborns of Erebor as well, so a nice bodyguard unit. Hammer Guard, Ironfoot Crossbows, and all the way over here, Erebor Legionaries, Axe Throwers, and Obsidian Guard, as well as some more mercenary cavalry. So a pretty well balanced Erebor army this, a little bit more cavalry than you would normally expect from them, but on this map, knowing that you're going to be on one of the two sides based on where you are in the lobby, Tundra probably thought that a little bit of extra cavalry would serve him well, and he's probably right in that. He is going to be facing off against Rhudaur, played by Mr. Sneakman, so Rhudaur, to be fair, they don't match up too badly against either of the two Dwarven factions if it gets into a up-close and personal fight because of all of their AP and javelins. Of course, at medium range, the Erebor crossbowmen are going to be a real concern for them, but that's true of anyone. Rhudaur clansmen with the armour upgrade, it'll help them survive a little bit longer on the front line, but that's all they're really going to be here for. They may be more damaging compared to normal spears like this, other normal spears like this, I should say, but they're still not going to be doing much damage against really heavily armoured, good quality Dwarven infantry, so they're just going to be here trying to hold on for as long as they can. They're going to be backed up by Rhudaur marksmen. I wouldn't overdo it on archers if you're facing off against the dwarves, because yes, you can outrange their crossbows, but the damage you're going to do with a unit like this is going to be very limited. Bring a couple of units of archers, yes, but don't try and place all your eggs into this basket, because generally speaking it's not going to go too well. Rhudaur swordsmen, again in numbers, they're just going to be here trying to fight on the front line with their numbers. trying to sort of occupy the dwarves. It's going to have to be elsewhere that Rhudaur do their damage, with units like the Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters here. Obviously their javelin's going to be very important. Witch Realm Enslavers will be very good in melee against heavily armoured units from the dwarves or Dol Amroth. And back here, Coldfell Maidens and Arthedain Nobles as well. I was about to say, the Rhudaur Cavalry is actually kind of awkward to face off against. A lot of AP, a lot of damage. Not necessarily the most durable themselves, so you can take advantage of that if you think you can outlast them, but for Dol Amroth in particular, it might be a little bit awkward because most of their cavalry is very heavily armoured, so they might end up taking more losses than they bargained for, which, considering they spent so much more on their cavalry, may prove to be a bit of something they want to avoid at the very least. Then we have Death Eater, who's going to be playing as Mordor. He's got cavalry as well, so we'll be seeing some good cav play, I'm sure. Temple Inquisitors, again, a very effective unit of melee cavalry. Over on the other side, the Melkor's Chosen as well, so very difficult to... The main thing that the Orcs generally do in a cavalry fight is they will try to win the mounted fight first and foremost. Any damage they can do to enemy infantry and sort of foot-based units is going to be a bit of a bonus after they win the cav fight for their faction. Obviously, it can still be devastating, but they don't place as much emphasis on that, because what they want to do, of course, is prevent enemy cavalry from charging in to their squishier ranks and sort of their high numbers units here, because obviously charges do so much damage so quickly, and if Mordor lose their numbers, it can be quite difficult to come back from those losses. Orc fodder are here though, Orc archers as well, so obviously some low tier units to pad the numbers, as expected from Mordor, to be fair. They can go all quality, but I don't really see the benefit to doing that. I can do with Angmar, certainly, but I feel as though Mordor really benefit from having the split between really high quality and a lot of numbers as well. Minas Morgul, Chosen and Moran on Halberds are a pretty good example of that, to be honest with you, because you have the really heavily armoured spearmen forming the nice bulwark, if you will, and then you have the halberdiers as well forming that phalanx and giving a bit of AP to this mix as well. Very nice combination to my mind. Orc Javelins, so cheap you may as well bring them. Temple Guard and Temple Execution, so all of the Temple units are on display, as well as Sauron's Will for the AP, and also of course some Olag Kai as well for that the real juggernaut unit that you have in the middle. Then we have Arthedain, played by the Vengeful One. So again, facing off against Harad, Arthedain can most certainly count on having the skirmish advantage in this sort of fight. Among the Western Kingdoms, they are one of the forces which has one of the most well-rounded skirmish forces. The Arthedain marksman with the armour upgrade are fantastic in a skirmish fight. Knowing you're going to be up against Harad, this is exactly the kind of unit you want to bring, because Harad really need to invest in their archers if they're going to defeat even the most basic of Arthedain archer units. So it does sort of put you off on a good standing almost immediately. Warns of the North as well, fantastic in melee, good armour-piercing arrows. Interesting to see them pointing against Rohan immediately. Maybe they intend to use them against any Rohirrim cavalry, but the Rohirrim cavalry is quite far away from them. Maybe a similar idea behind the Dunedain Mounted Company, a unit of melee cavalry. You don't see an awful lot of them because they are quite expensive, and if Arthedain, as with most other factions, because they have 2 units of cavalry with 2 hit points, generally speaking you tend to see them given priority. But still, a unit of melee cavalry which could be very useful against Rohirrim Lancers and Haradrim Lancers for that matter. 1 level of armour upgrade on the Arthedain Men-at-Arms, with the upgraded Arthedain Pikemen as well, should make them more efficient. Obviously a very nice, sturdy phalanx, but these 2 units will suffer at the hands of some of Harad's better infantry if they get into close quarters. The Trollmen units in particular will tear through the standard ranks of Arthedain, so they really do need to be careful of that. Having said that, the same is also true for the basic ranks of the Haradrim against a unit like the Dunedain Peacekeepers. Exactly the sort of units they want to be facing off against are going to be the lower tier Haradrim, because they will tear them apart, to be honest. And they will be relatively even, I think, with the Serpent Guard. I might give the slight edge there to the Dunedain Peacekeepers, actually. With the armour upgrade, I'm not so sure. But yeah, the Serpent Guard are a unit which will do slightly better, and of course the Trollmen are as well, but they can't be everywhere on the line. And Evendim Spearmen here to back up from the rear. And I think this is more Arthedain units over here, indeed it is. Royal Court of House Ardenlaith, multiple HP Lancers, interestingly enough, as well as a lot of Dunedain Scouts. So this tells me he maybe ran out of money, rather, to purchase the Knights of Numenor. But the Royal Court of House Ardenlaith will still do a job, but Rohan won't be overly concerned with that. Then we have M1 Breakout playing as Lindon, so the first Elven faction we're seeing on display today, and it is going to be Lindon. Interesting matchup with Rohan. They're certainly both factions which don't pack on the armour as much as a lot of the other Westerners. But Lindon, certainly, if it comes down to just a pure melee fight, they're going to be in massive trouble. It's actually quite interesting that Eclipse went for so much in the way of AP shock infantry. Yes, they still have high base damage, but Lindon's melee defense is going to be far too much for units like Rhudaur Axemen to crack through. 4 Lindon Pikemen are here. A lot of Lindon's army is hidden, to be fair. A lot of archers are bound to be there. Of course, Harland and riders. Lindon have got a lot of hybrid cavalry, which is obviously very multi-purpose. But in the cavalry stakes, you would certainly back Rohan, just if through nothing else, sheer numbers. But also, if Rohan have gone for stuff like Sons of Yule, Lindon are going to have to invest in a fair amount themselves in units like the Horse Lords of Ulmo if they intend to win. And of course the Noldor and Blade Masters, which to be fair I think it is on foot where Lindon are going to be most at home here. Units like the Noldor and Blade Masters are going to be a massive problem for Rohan to deal with in melee. They're going to have to try and charge into them, I think, or deal with them with javelins, because that will be the best way to deal with Blade Masters like that. But without further ado, let's begin. It should be an interesting fight this. I'm not sure who I favour based on the compositions. I would say maybe I slightly favour the red team, interestingly enough. Yes, Erebor I think are very strong, for all the wrong reasons, but I do think they are very strong. But if there is a faction which is fairly decent against the Dwarves, which will make life very difficult for them, it will be Rhudaur, because if Rhudaur decides to advance forward and catch Erebor out a little bit, that'll be a lot of damage done to them. Dol Amroth, I think, in general, are kind of a little bit underwhelming still, as it stands in standard 0.97. They still have quite a lot to offer, especially with regards to their cav, but Mordor across the way and Rhudaur actually combined have got cavalry forces, which is going to make it very, very difficult, I think, for Dol Amroth to really be efficient. Here in the middle, in the narrower sections, I think Arthedain will be quite at home at range. They may have a couple of issues if it comes down to just pure brute strength in melee. I think Harad will quite fancy their chances there, especially with all the AP offered by their trollmen units at the high end. But I think Arthedain have got what it takes to, at the very least, turn this into a really long, atrocious ground war in the settlement against Harad, which is not really what they want, I don't think, because I think elsewhere things are slightly favouring the red team. Now, Rohan, interestingly enough, this is actually something I maybe didn't expect so much. Eclipse is going to move backwards. This does change the complexion of the battle a little bit. There are the Shield Maidens, which are another fantastic unit, especially against Lindon, actually, so Lindon do need to be careful of them. Arthedain going to be moving forward with Dunedain Scouts. But I actually think this is the right move from Rohan. Having a look, it's obvious that Lindon, of course, are going to be in the trees. Most of their army is revealing itself now, but will they fall into the trap? Because that most certainly is not all of Rohan's army. You yourself were hiding as Lindon, so you should be fully aware of the fact Rohan probably still have cavalry in the trees somewhere. So you need to fan out and try and find them, and that's a dangerous thing to do. Because if you find them and you're unprepared to deal with them, that's going to be real bad for you. Mithlon Lancers, for example, they're Javcav. They can do a lot of damage with those javelins, but if they do get caught in melee, they're lancers, and against something like the Sons of Yule, they will struggle. And all Lindon's cavalry is expensive, and there you go. You can see immediately the Rohirrim cavalry reveals itself. Riders of the Fold. There's also the red shields over here. But the Sons of Yule are going to be sort of screening them. Harland and Riders and Mithlon Lancers, they're going to take losses here, of course. If there's one thing Lindon do not like, it's being under arrow fire like this. And of course, Rohan have got so many horse archers. Very, very big units for horse archers as well. It's going to be a problem for them, and Lindon probably shouldn't chase Rohan, to be honest with you. I mean, if I were Lindon, I wouldn't chase Rohan at all. I would move into the middle, because if you try and engage in the outer reaches of the map here, you're going to be giving the initiative to Rohan's cavalry. They're going to be able to kite you backwards all day long, and units like this are really going to struggle. And again, even javelin to javelin, the Lindon cavalry may win this, but efficiency wise, Rohan probably won't be crying too many tears over this fight, even if they do end up losing it. Royal Court of House Armlaith here in the middle, so Arthedain's cavalry decided not to follow, which I actually think is the right idea. You can actually see that Dol Amroth's cavalry is coming across now, so yeah, Lindon, red shields are coming back, the Dol Amroth cavalry is here. Lindon need to back off, like they are outmatched now. Like Rohan have got all their support nearby, Rohan have got superior numbers on horseback. Lindon are not going to be able to win that, but Lindon don't need to win that. They don't need to engage here. It's all about knowing when your hand is forced, and Lindon's most certainly isn't. Meanwhile, interesting. Interesting that Sin got caught out there. Maybe he was microing his cavalry elsewhere, and he just failed to notice the Royal Court House Armlaith. It's not a huge charge, to be fair. Only a small chunk taken out of the Southron archers, but it is effectively 3 kills for the Vengeful One. So he saw an opportunity and he took it, so fair play indeed. Still quite a long way to go before the battle gets underway over on this side of things. Again, interesting pairing, Erebor and Dol Amroth. In theory, it's a very good one, because for what Erebor lack in terms of mobility, Dol Amroth should be able to cover that with their cav. Their cav, however, has gone over to the other side, and to be fair, Erebor brought quite a lot of their own cav here, which is not something you see all the time. The Hammer Guard maybe, but the mercenary cavalry is rarely seen. Dunedain scouts, mounted horse... Well, I say mounted horse archers, all horse archers are mounted, but mounted Dunedain I was going to say. And to be fair, they do a lot of damage from horseback. They're not very good when return fire is upon them, which is imminent, but they can do quite a lot of damage while they're still here, and the Southron archers already taking a bit of a beating, but things have turned a little bit perhaps. Sin maybe doesn't need to move in quite so much. Royal Court of House Armlaith was going to move in. Thought better of it in the end. Interesting that. They decided to back off from the civilians. They could have got a charge in there, but they decided not to in the end. There are Black Swans here, but they don't have... I think maybe he thinks he can get in behind. He's not really going to be able to do that though. The Haradrim Spearmen are in the way. I mean, to be fair, you can still charge into the Haradrim Spearmen and do tons and tons of damage. Especially like this when their backs turned to you. Not braced. That's a lot of damage. Meanwhile, over here still trading blows with the cavalry over here. Lindon's still going. Interestingly enough as well, I mean, there are quite a lot of bodies for the Rohirrim cavalry as well. Like the elves in general, if things start getting attrition-y like this, especially if you're playing into one of the strengths of the faction you're facing off against, it rarely goes well for you. So I don't think Eclipse will be too concerned about this. I mean, he's taking losses, but so are the elves, and the elves can't keep this up for as long. There are the Dunedain Mounted Company coming across from Arthedain now as well, so good to see that the factions across the field here are supporting one another. Dol Amroth are here, so maybe the red, or the blue team I should say at this point, are feeling as though maybe they can start putting real pressure over on this side of the battlefield with all their cav. Be interesting to see where Sin's cavalry is, that his cavalry is still at the back here. His infantry, however, is being backed up by Rohan's. This, however, is pretty aggressive, I have to say, from Arthedain. I do like it. He's putting pressure on, but Arthedain can't afford to move too far forwards here, because if he does, he's going to have to deal with the full force of the infantry from both Harad and Rohan, both of which have got plentiful AP, both of which have got all the tools they need to deal extreme damage to Arthedain. And Arthedain is not going to get any immediate help from any of his allies, because Arthedain's quite a long way away. And to be fair, actually, if I was Sin and Eclipse, I would be genuinely considering moving forward and crushing Arthedain here, because I think maybe he's gotten a little bit too far away from any support. Yes, he can hold the line for quite a while with a phalanx like this, but he's not really going to hold up too well against quite a lot of the units that are on the other side. There's also the small matter of the Dwarven cavalry closing in a little bit here. It will be interesting, I think, if they do collapse in on Arthedain, what the rest of the red team actually do to help. Whether they actually do try to rush and scramble to help him, or whether they leave him to his fate and try and get some victories elsewhere on the map. Riddermark skirmishers pulling out their axes and chasing off the Dunedain Mounted Company. That should be a battle the Dunedain Mounted Company win, although with close support, maybe it's not the case. Maybe with all those archers giving a bit of support. Javelins also now coming back out. Harland and Riders still doing their thing, so it's still very much a back and forth here between the cavalry. But like I said, it is one where I think the blue team will ultimately have the better end of it, because for one thing, numbers, and for another thing, some of the Arthedain support I think will stop moving if he has to focus on the middle here. It honestly surprises me that they haven't attacked already, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe they feel as... because honestly, like, Mordor and Rhudaur, like this battle over here, is taking time to get going. I think, you know, the window of opportunity is closing a little bit here, perhaps. Grey Company are firing away, but they're also taking losses, to be fair to them. Again, real glass cannons, the Grey Company, as all mounted rangers are. Again, it is a risk to move in here, I think, and try and crush Arthedain quickly, because Arthedain are a pretty tough nut to crack when they're set up with their phalanxes, with their ranged support units as well, but I think it's a risk worth taking, to be honest with you. Because as things stand, I think over here, to be honest, I fancy Mordor and Rhudaur in this fight. Especially if they try and avoid the hills and all the Dwarven units over there. If they just try and push through against the settlement here, against primarily Dol Amroth, I think they do alright. Dornanil archers starting to fire, so we're going to start to see some action over on this side as well. Over here, meanwhile, still... getting closer now to actually Lindon's range support unit, so Lindon has been slowly but surely rolled back a little bit with the cavalry as they continue to trade blows, but of course that may very well have been very intentional from M1 Breakout to bring his 4 Lindon archers into play, which of course will do some considerable damage to units that are in range of them. All Elven archers will, of course. Sons of Eorl are over here as well, so we'll be getting into the business end of this fight pretty soon, because I do think this is going to be one of those fights where the setup takes a considerable amount of time more than the actual blood and glory in the middle. Haven Knights charging in. That was a pretty bold charge, going in with the mercenary cavalry. Orc fodder are here. Of course, they will do damage to orc fodder, but they're still spears, so not a particularly efficient fight. And of course, there you can see Temple Inquisitors here. Of the two units, of course, the Haven Knights are superior as melee cavalry go, but the support is with the Temple Inquisitors here, as low tier as it may be. Also, the archers are starting to fire now, so the orc archers, lower tier archers from both Rhudaur and Mordor, of course, but they're just here to support the strength they're going to be bringing in melee, both in terms of numbers and AP. I like how aggressive Death Eater is being with his cavalry here. Again, the Melkor's chosen. I think Engsvitz is maybe moving his cavalry around on the other side of the battlefield. He needs to catch up with his organisation here, otherwise he's going to take really huge losses with not a lot of gain. Mercenary cavalry are here. Haven Knight's going to chase the Melkor's chosen. That's a risky fight for them, because I think the Melkor's chosen, with their damage and with the nearby support of all of the Orc archers, would certainly win that fight. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard are now back on station, but I'm not sure I like this formation. There's gaps. It's sort of panicking, getting into a box as quickly as they possibly can. I mean, to be fair, they may be trying to funnel them around to the Dwarven position in the trees. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of death out here already. Most of it's civilians and orc fodder, so nothing too important so far, but I feel as though that is not going to last too much longer. Lindon, meanwhile, are just sort of hanging out here. Lindon are in danger, actually, of being left behind in this battle a little bit, because they're sort of holding position, but the action is going to be happening elsewhere, and in particular, I'm very surprised that Rohan and Harad have not moved forward to try and crush Arthedain, because now it's not as if the red team are going to be able to support from Mordor or Rhudaur. Lindon are still far away, and it'll take them a while to get over here. It's actually Arthedain that are still the ones making the aggressive forward movements, which really surprises me, and credit to the Vengeful One, because he's in a quite precarious situation here. I think they're trying to skirmish here, Sin, and potentially Eclipse as well. I mean, Medicel Guard here, but Shield Maidens are starting to fire down the line. They're certainly going to do some work. They're going to soften the Vengeful One up, but I feel as though time is of the essence, and I feel as though they can really make that position work for them if they're maybe just a little bit more urgent with their movements. Listen to me lecturing people on the game who've been playing it for longer than I have. Mercenary cavalry still in the trees, still some elite Dwarven units, but again, momentum has kind of stalled out a little bit over on this side as well. Again, over on this side, it's actually the other way around. I would suggest the red team have got an opening here, particularly over here next to the settlement. I think if they move forward quickly, if they back it up with Rhudaur's javelins, the damage they could do would be extremely substantial. Dol Amroth's cavalry is over on the other side of the battlefield. They're not going to be a factor. Well, I say that. Their cavalry is actually way back there. They're going to start making their way back towards the main event, as it were. I don't know, like, again, I feel as though people are just a little bit too timid for my liking in this battle. I feel as though there's an opportunity here that no one's really decided to gamble and take. Someone's going to at some point. There's the Dunedain Peacekeepers chased off the flanking force, but they can't move forward themselves, otherwise they'll get peppered by Eclipse. And of course, the longer they delay, and yeah, you can see Lindon are starting to send over force now. Lindon should send their whole army, to be honest with you. The longer they stay out in the trees over there, they're not going to do any good out there. And also, they make themselves vulnerable to all of the enemy cavalry as well, so they may as well come over towards the settlement, help Arthedain out. Maybe they hope they can use Arthedain as a meat shield, and later on in the fight their infantry will be healthy, but that's a risky game to play, because that's assuming Arthedain will be able to withstand the pressure of two factions worth of infantry crashing down upon them, which will happen eventually. It's not happened as soon as I would like, but it will happen eventually. Meanwhile, still the trading of blows over here, and still over here, once again, it's the trading of blows at range primarily. Not a lot going on in melee, which honestly still surprises me. It really does surprise me that no one has decided to truly take the bull by the horns at this stage in the battle. It looks as though that was what's going to happen, and then all of a sudden it's stalled out again. Meanwhile, there's a bit of damage being done here. The Black Serpents charging into the Evendim Spears, and once again, remarkably, the only player to have been truly aggressive in this fight has been Arthedain, and like I said, considering the potentially very dodgy position he finds himself in, earns the Vengeful One massive credit from me, personally. Bit of a charge coming in here from the Haven Knights, but they're going to get peppered by javelins immediately, which is not great for them, but they're so tanky that they can at least take a little bit of damage like that, but they won't want to be in range of javelins for too many more volleys, if they can help it. Some around on halberds over here. Sauron's will. And Orc Archers still slowly but surely trying to whittle down, and again, if there's one thing the Orcs are good at doing, it's outlasting through sheer numbers. The Rohirrim cavalry is now over on this side of the field, all of it as well. So Eclipse being able to focus on microing his cavalry because he doesn't really need to utilise his infantry all that much, although to be fair, he has lost micro a little bit here on his shield maidens, and they have been caught by the Peacekeepers. The Peacekeepers, on the other hand, have also taken a fair amount of damage from what I can only assume would be javelins. And they are they're still throwing their axes here at almost point blank. They're not doing a huge, well, getting a huge amount of kills at the moment, but definitely going to be enough to do a lot of hit point damage, if nothing else, to the mighty Wardens. Here we go. So now you can see that Harad and Rohan, their infantry, is mobilising, and this is where I think Arthedain will struggle. It just surprises me that this hasn't happened earlier on in this fight. They can do a lot of damage quickly, and maybe it is stuff like rangers that they were concerned about, because if you do blob up, of course, Arthedain have got plenty of Dunedain that are capable of using the body piercing, but I think this is probably the biggest red mark in this game so far. The fact that M1 Breakout is still just stood here, and there are no units over here at this point. He is standing guard in those woods for no real good reason. He's sending over some Mythlon Marines, but he needs to send over all of his units. He's doing no good to anyone out there. He needs to either move forward and try and flank around, which would be very risky, I think, or he needs to support Arthedain directly, which is what I would do, because I think he's actually left it too late already. I don't think Arthedain would stand this assault for too long. There's just too much AP on offer from both Harad and from Rohan, and that's the sort of thing which will not go down too well among the Arthedain ranks. Pride themselves on their armour as they do. Peacekeepers, though, showing that a dedicated unit of melee infantry, especially those armed with axes, are capable of dishing out punishment far better than a unit of axe throwers crossed with line infantry that the shield maidens are. They can do okay in melee, the shield maidens, but not against a really high quality unit like the Peacekeepers. Still taking some pot shots. Eastmark Spearmen are back here, and you can see already they're starting to push through the lines here, which is a really bad sign for Arthedain here in the middle. To counteract that, however, there's also a big assault from the red team happening over here, which is good. At the very least, they're not being too passive here, the red team. Like, even if they are seeing Arthedain struggle in the middle, they are going to move forward and try and make the blue team struggle as well. Mordor and Rhudaur together. It can be quite a scary force, considering all the numbers that are going to wash down upon you. The really high-end units from Mordor. The devastating armour-piercing damage that Rhudaur can bring to the table as well. And Rhudaur are primarily going up against the dwarves. But the dwarves here, you can see how thin their line is, but they're still, victory still seems certain for the dwarves. Balance of force is evenly matched now, so the numbers may be getting the better of them at this point, and maybe spreading themselves a little bit too thin. But Rhudaur and Mordor are having to deal with the Rohirrim cavalry coming all the way around here onto these hills. But again, I think Rhudaur and Mordor have got enough cavalry in reserve that Rohan won't be able to have quite the impact they were maybe hoping for over here, and also there's a lot of units which, if they stay in melee with them for any length of time, like the Rhudaur Axemen, going to be able to dish out the punishment. There goes Mordor's general, though. Not a good loss for them. They are likely on the field today. They're probably the faction which will be affected most by the loss of a general. Harad may be a close second. In come the Temple Execution as well. The Trolls causing havoc. Dol Amroth, I think, are going to struggle in this sort of situation. They have a few units which should do quite well, but I would expect a player like Death Eater to be able to find the gaps, to be able to wash over Dol Amroth to an extent. They're holding on pretty well, though. Enkspitz is reacting quite well. I think all Enkspitz needs to do here is hold the line and really bleed Mordor out, because I would expect here in the middle that, yeah, you can see here that they're just being overrun. This was always going to be the fate that awaited Arthedain, I think. The Vengeful One, I think he's done quite well, and I praise him for being aggressive, but there is also an element of this where maybe he should have seen the risky situation he was putting himself in, because he moved forwards into that position, don't forget. As much as I do enjoy when people are sort of taking the front foot, he did move in, maybe a little bit too gung-ho, and unfortunately here Lindon are moving around now. They see the fact that so much has been committed forward from Harad and Rohan, but I don't think they're going to arrive in time. I think Arthedain like a field that's been descended upon by locusts, I don't think Arthedain is going to have much left. I mean, here you can see all of these really, really powerful armor-piercing units working in conjunction. Westmark Marshals, Trollmen, Champions of Nathrat, there's cavalry running over what few units haven't been killed already, and of course that means what little cohesion remains is being overrun, and that's not good for them. But I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner, but the result was pretty much the same anyway. Harad and Rohan in conjunction with one another, 2v1'd an Arthedain army in the middle very effectively. Exactly what they would have been hoping for, and unfortunately for the red team, they seem to be running out of steam a little bit over here. Mordor maybe not having quite the impact they wanted. They have managed to get pretty far over here, but not many of their units are actually left fighting. They have managed to get in behind here with their cavalry, but even if Mordor do end up winning this fight, it won't be to the same extent they've won in the middle, which means I think the red team are going to have to hope that Lindon pull it back in the late game, and that Rhudaur's army manages to defeat the dwarves to an extent that evens the fight out a little bit. But unfortunately, getting the better of the dwarves in a big way is obviously going to be difficult. Their units are high quality enough that it can be a tricky one, to say the least. Rhudaur axemen coming back through the wilderness. It does look as though, to be fair, the Rohirrim cavalry have been largely dealt with, but that was a distraction that has bought the blue team enough time over here to maybe even win. Even if they don't, the extent to which the blue team have won in other sections of the battlefield means that that may be the decisive action, to be fair. Nice multitasking from Eclipse, sent his infantry on one side, used his cavalry to distract attention on another. Very nice indeed. And here you can see the Dol Amroth cavalry. Now there's not a lot of units to protect what's left of the Orc backlines. They're going to be able to charge into the Orc archers, get a lot of killing done. And again, this just advances the blue team's goals. Like, even if Dol Amroth don't win here, which I don't think they will. I mean, Parathor champions are here, but they're getting set upon by Temple executioners. There's still trolls. Civilians are on the way back over. That's not going to be enough. And there's still Rhudaur cavalry as well. But I think Dol Amroth have done well enough in this situation. In a battle that, you know, Mordor are always going to prefer that kind of fight to Dol Amroth, especially in the current patch. But they've done well enough, I think, to give them a real leg up in this fight. Lindon coming in from the rear. Since Ashari Shadows have been caught by all of this Harland infantry, and M1 Breakout, to be fair, does have a very large proportion of his army still alive, including his Noldorin units, which are going to be a real concern to deal with. There goes Dol Amroth's general, taken out by the Arthedain. But again, just looking over here, there's a Dol Amroth unit in here. There's still AP, which not going to be useful against Lindon, but against any Dol Amroth units that come across, not Dol Amroth rather, any support from the other sections of the battlefield comes across. Mithlon Lancers charging in, that's fairly optimistic, charging into the Champions of Nathrat in that way. Yeah, I think, to be fair, I think Arthedain, they won't have been able to get as many kills as they would have liked, and that's not their fault as such, but as a result, I just don't think it's going to be another 2v1. Arthedain have killed some of the Harad and Rohan forces, and Lindon match up better against those two factions than Arthedain do anyway, but even with those factors, you have to say, in a 2v1, you back the 2 rather than the 1. Horse Lords of Ulmo are back there. Still doing the business. They're difficult in the late game. They're so tricky to bring down without missile units to support anti-cav. But again, it's only one unit of cavalry. There's still the Dol Amroth forces coming in there, so I don't think that's going to be enough to tilt the balance of power the other way. Maybe. Dol Amroth's units have actually had some units reform, and in come the Halberdiers, and suddenly this fight is going to turn around. Parathor champions doing the business. They're actually going to try and leave the Temple Executioners alive, which does surprise me a little bit. You can see here the Sauron's Will charging down the Belfalas Marines, trying to do a bit of damage. At this point, I think Death Eater maybe starting to think, well, I just need to try and kill as many as I possibly can. At the very least, don't let Dol Amroth go over to 3v1 Lindon. Unfortunately, however, this sort of microcosm of a battle over here between the Dwarves and Rhudaur has not gone in favour of the red team either. Rhudaur, under normal circumstances, I would think they're one of the better factions for fighting Dwarves. But the Dwarves, they were able to use terrain to their advantage. The support from the Rohan cavalry was quite important as well, I think, because it did distract attention. It took the pressure off the Dwarven front line a little bit. allowed their quality to shine through without being completely overwhelmed through sheer numbers. And there's still Sons of Yule back here, to be fair, as well, which have been causing havoc among the Rhudaur skirmishers. These units of Rhudaur axemen have not been able to be committed to the front line, and they were needed. You need all your strength, front and centre, against Erebor. There goes, I think that was Arthedain's general. Dunedain Mounted Company coming in, Dunedain Scouts also coming in, Arthedain trying to back up what's left of their battered and bruised allies, but I don't think it's going to be enough at this point. I think the blue team are on the way. I like the look of the red team, well, there goes the Rhudaur general. I like the look of the red team, generally speaking, armies, compositions, what I could see anyway of Lindon's. But I have to say, I think the cohesion from the blue team has been far better. They've been, in particular with their cavalry, they've been sending all of it in big blobs from one side of the field to the other. That's not really something that the red team have been doing. Lindon pressured pretty much on their own, a little bit of support from Arthedain. Mordor and Rhudaur consolidated their cavalry on this side, never really... They used it well defensively, but that's about it. Used the Melkors show to smash through as well, which is all well and good. Noldor and Guard are in here. Lindon are putting up a good fight over here. As you would expect, it's a pretty decent matchup for them if they're going up against two factions like this who place a lot of emphasis on AP and also take advantage of that emphasis and bring a lot of AP units. It's something Lindon will tend to trade pretty well against. But I think just through sheer numbers here, I think M1 Breakout is just going to find himself overwhelmed. And yeah, I think the teamwork has been far better. I think the use of the cavalry has been very good. More in a supporting role. It hasn't been like the match winner in this battle by any means. The decisive actions have been taken when large quantities of infantry have been smashing together, interestingly enough. The cavalry, however, the trades early on were good from the blue team. The distraction of the Rohan and maybe a couple of other units of Dol Amroth cavalry over there as well was very good. Allowed them to sort of break up the relentless assault from Mordor and Rhudaur a little bit and allowed the Dwarves and Dol Amroth to get set and just about pull out a victory over there as well. Just about being the operative word, especially when it comes to Dol Amroth, because I don't think they've got much left. Some battered halberdiers, but the Orcs lay defeated. Rhudaur too, scattered. Erebor, to be fair, don't have much left either, so I do believe actually Mordor and Rhudaur, without that cavalry support, even if it didn't do much damage, the distraction that it offered, the Sons of Yule probably have racked up quite a healthy kill count at this point by feasting on these Rhudaur marksmen, but even so, even if the cavalry wasn't the devastating tool that maybe could have been in this battle over on this side, the distraction I think was invaluable because it allowed Erebor and Dol Amroth the breathing room they needed to take advantage of that fight and seize it for themselves. And of course, when it comes down to it over here in the final dying embers of this fight, Lindon just aren't going to have the manpower to cut their way through all of the armies that lay before them. And I do think Lindon probably should have come forward to support Arthedain a little bit sooner, or at the very least in the chat maybe advise Arthedain to pull back a little bit. One or the other, like you either move with your allies or tell them to pull back. You can't just let Arthedain do as they please, charge into a really, really hairy situation over here, and then just kind of watch. It was always going to end in tears for the red team from that perspective. Dunedain Scouts are over here, so there's still quite a lot of ranged units to be fair, tearing into Rohan and Harad, which are probably going to inflict a lot of casualties as well, to be fair. Both of those factions under sustained arrow fire can take a lot of losses. 4 Lindon Archers and Dunedain Scouts doing their thing. Shooting circle, not necessarily needed in this situation. They're not getting shot by anything in return, nothing that I can see. Still some Serpent Guard over here. Still some forces from Mordor as well, not many. A few Sauron's Will and a few Minas Morgul Chosens. And actually the Temple Executioners that Dol Amroth let live are over here. I suppose, to be fair, you could say maybe Mordor did kind of narrowly win. Dol Amroth have got so little in terms of infantry left. But over on that side as a whole, because of how Erebor have managed to defeat Rhudaur, you would definitely say that all across the field, really, the blue team have, on the two sides, made narrow victories in the early skirmish and in the large battle that happened over there. It was a narrow victory, certainly, but a victory nonetheless. But over here in the middle, the fight against Arthedain was a much more substantial victory for the blue team, and I think that will end up being the difference maker. Forward come Harad. It's a high quality battle, this, to be fair, and still these arrows are going to bring the kill counts a little bit closer together, but it's just going to be a case of manpower at this point. The final 2,000 frames as we get into it. Harland infantry do end up routing in the end. These 2 blocks of 4 Lindon Archers, they are going to get shot back at now by Helmingas, to be fair, and of course Lindon don't do too well in a skirmish fight. They'll do their best, but it's not really where they're most at home, and there you can see the mad death animation where they go 2D in T-pose because the trollmen charged into them and knocked the living daylights out of them. Lindon archers, of course, will not do too well against trollmen in melee, as you would expect. Still a bit of chaos happening over here. Sons of Yul finished playing with their food, and the Rhudaur survivors over on the other side. Dunedain scouts have now been caught by Serpent Guard, and now they're going to get sandwiched by Sons of Yul. That should be the end of them, you'd imagine. Taking a charge from the Rohan Knights is not something I think their morale is going to withstand, even as they are Dunedain. Athlon Halberdiers are also here. The Black Serpents over there have been charging around, making a nuisance of themselves, as is most of the blue team cavalry. Good example this of a fight where cavalry doesn't necessarily need to be the all-conqueror in terms of damage across all of them. I'm sure that some of the, in particular the Sons of Yul, probably racked up a good kill count, like I said. Some of the units probably did get good kill counts across the whole thing, but you don't necessarily need your cavalry to be the be-all and end-all of your army. It can fill the role of cannon fodder, if you can call it that in this situation. That may be putting it a little bit too, maybe going a little bit too far with it, but there's no doubt here that the cavalry was used in more of a supporting role than maybe you could see, where it is sort of like front and centre, the primary focus when it comes to damage. There goes Mordor. Cleansed from the field. What have we over here? Still some units? Well, I think this is it from Mr. Sneak Man. He's got a banner carrier and one of the Witch Realm enslavers, and I think that's just about it. Where are the dwarves? I mean, the dwarves did win, but again, you can see over here the dwarves didn't win by much. They don't have that many infantry units left. Yeah, there's the Obsidian Guard, Iron for Axe Throwers, but with those dwarven units, you'd expect them to be able to withstand and push back Rhudaur as it was. They only did so narrowly and only with cavalry support, so again, important teamwork. Like, if the team wasn't working well with one another, the blue team could have lost this flank and it could have been a very different fight at that point. Winning the middle then could have done very little good for the blue team, because they would have had to deal with Lindon from one side, a largely healthy Lindon from one side, and of course the remnants of Mordor and Rhudaur from the other. As it is, they only had to deal with one of those things. And that, as they say, will be that, I think. Westmark Marshals are back there. Close battle as well, 7%. Considering how this was a brutal 4v4 field battle, that's a pretty close percentage. When you have this much cavalry charging around on a field, it's always surprising when the battle is that close, to be honest with you, because if you look the wrong way for a second, cavalry can do the business very quickly. There goes the Lindon General, as well as what's left of the Rhudaur General. Yeah, definitely a victory well earned. And again, that's what I was talking about. Always going to be a quality fight with this many quality players involved. Kills pretty samey across the whole spread, to be honest with you. That's what you would expect as well, considering it is a real mishmash of factions. So it's not as if it's going to be like Orcs versus Elves, where even if the Elves were to lose, you'd still expect them to get noticeably more kills. This is definitely a very even spread. The highest kills, interestingly, well, maybe not interestingly, they go to Erebor, but then they were also facing off against what was the largest army in terms of numbers on the field today, in terms of Rhudaur, and they had a decent position and they had a lot of high damage units, so maybe not too surprising Erebor got the most in terms of number of kills. But other than that, actually, the next two, well, suffice it to say that actually, generally speaking, on average, it does look as though the higher kills did go to the red team, which is kind of interesting. But again, that's really by the by. The victory was the blue team's here, and I think well deserved. Again, I think the way they used their cavalry in the supporting role was very good. They knew what they had with their cavalry, and they used it very, very nicely. Like, I feel as though Lindon got drawn into a fight that they weren't really going to do all that well. They did okay, I suppose, with that early engagement, but it wasn't really going to gain them anything. Like, at the very best, they broke even in those initial engagements, and even then I think that's being kind of generous because of how expensive the Lindon Cav is, and how much better suited the Rohirrim cavalry is to that kind of fight. Moving to the other side of the battlefield, of course, it was a very narrow victory for the blue team, but a victory nonetheless where there would have been no victory if not for the good teamwork between them. I think if the red team were going to change anything about this fight, I think they would probably choose, well, Lindon would probably choose to make their move sooner, because they were a little bit too late by the time they decided to move. They did get a lot of kills, to be fair, in the narrow window of opportunity that they had. but ultimately it was never going to be enough. Arthedain maybe wouldn't be that aggressive. I commend him for it, but I feel as though he should also probably have not been that much on the front foot. He should have been forward enough to sort of give Rohan and Harad, I should say, something to think about, but maybe not to the point where it was so easy for him to just move in and for the other team to just move in and crush them. And yeah, I feel as though on the other side of things, I think Rhudaur and Mordor, they played this quite by the book. They moved together as a two. They wanted to overwhelm with their numbers, with their cavalry. But they were, like, the red team were just more isolated in their pockets on the field, whereas the blue team were more fluid between their armies, and I think that showed in the result, to be fair. Let's see what did the damage for Sin. The Black Serpents and the Serpent Guard doing okay for themselves, to be fair. You would maybe expect a few more on the Black Serpents and a few less on the Serpent Guard, considering the current balance in standard 0.97. But still, decent returns from them. Hashari Shadows and, well, Hashari Shadows doing okay, of course, for Rangers. Again, 119 for Rangers, maybe a little lackluster considering the fact Arthedain were in neat, long lines. But, no, again, considering it's a pretty fast and furious battle, they did okay for themselves. Low kills, of course, on the low tier units, as you would expect, but as we go further down, yeah, this is where the damage has been done. Serpent Guard doing okay for themselves, but in particular, when they got up close and personal with Arthedain's units in melee, the Trollmen units, the Champions of Nafrat, and the standard Trollmen were always going to go to town on units like Arthedain Pikemen and Arthedain Men-at-Arms. Not a good matchup for them at all. And of course, I'm sure that Rohan chipped in with their Javelins, Axe Throwers, and their own AP units as well. So yeah, big thank you to Sin for sending this one to me. A very high quality battle indeed. Moving forwards, I suppose the next battle will probably be another one of these that he sent me. Obviously, the Mountain Blade, Bannerlord is imminent, as it were, and obviously I do intend to get in on that because it's looking good. I have to say, like, Bannerlord, I was kind of wondering what Bannerlord would be, if it would ever be anything at all, and it's looking pretty good, I have to say. Like, I do like the general look and the look of things at the moment, and I do want to get in on that. Obviously, it's the perfect opportunity to diversify. Like I said, a channel update will be imminent. I've been talking about it for the past 2 to 3 weeks, to be fair, at the end of these videos like this, and it is now definitely the sort of thing that I'm going to be talking about, I think, because there are a few topics that I think I do need to cover and sort of clarify a few things as we move forward into the immediate future, with obviously, you know, the hopeful diversification with Bannerlord in conjunction with the Total War stuff that I've been doing, and also a few things that I'm going to have to start considering for a little bit further afield, which is of course important to consider as well, because obviously the overall future of the channel is going to be decided by those things also, and obviously things like the university schedule as well, although again that is something which is a situation which is very much in flux at the moment because of the general health situation that's going around at the moment. Honestly, I would expect a lockdown fairly soon. I mean, I think they're trying to delay it as long as possible, but there is a certain air of inevitability about a lot of this, which could be a good thing, as long as I don't catch anything. It would actually, well, it's a good thing from the point of view of the channel anyway. As long as I don't catch anything, it would of course allow me to completely focus on this and sort of do my university work entirely at home for a little while. But again, that's kind of speculation. It's the sort of thing which can be gone into in more detail in my channel update video. For the time being though, again, just assume business as usual, at least for the next week or so, until Bannerlord content maybe starts coming onto the scene. But again, that's more just sort of stuff that's more content, more so than anything in terms of any drastic changes with regards to scheduling or presence or anything like that. So yeah, next up will be another one of these Sin or Eclipse replays that they've sent me in recent times, I believe. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.